The night before his execution, the prison was quieter than usual, as if the concrete itself was holding its breath. In cell 47, Marcus Hayes sat alone on the edge of his bunk, hands trembling, not from fear of death, but from something far heavier. He had only one request, one final wish. Not a meal, not forgiveness, not a phone call, just to see his dog, the only living soul who never abandoned him, never judged him, never walked away. When the warden heard it, he scoffed. "A dog? That's your last request?" Marcus didn't lift his head. He just whispered, "She's all I ever had." The guards rolled their eyes, but protocol forced them to consider the request. Most thought it was pointless. Some thought it was pathetic, but none of them knew the truth. They didn't know the dog wasn't just a pet. They didn't know what she had done for him, what she had survived with him, and they had no idea what she was capable of. The next morning, as the execution chamber was being prepared, a guard sprinted across the courtyard shouting, "Sir, the dog is here!" But the warden froze when he saw the animal trotting beside the officers, not limping, not scared, but alert, focused, eyes locked on the prison doors, like she understood exactly what was happening inside. What happened when Marcus finally saw her would shake the entire prison and rewrite everything they thought they knew about loyalty, justice, and the lengths a dog will go to save her human. Stay with me until the end, because what unfolds between a man and his dog in those final minutes will leave even the toughest guards speechless. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get started. Marcus Hayes hadn't always been behind bars. 3 years earlier, he was just another construction worker living in a cramped apartment on the outskirts of Denver. He worked 12-hour shifts, came home exhausted, and had exactly one friend in the world. Her name was Bella, a German Shepherd mix with mismatched ears and scars across her snout from whatever hell she'd escaped before finding her way to him. He'd discovered her behind a dumpster during a lunch break, bleeding and barely breathing. Most people would have called animal control. Marcus wrapped her in his work jacket and spent his entire paycheck on vet bills. The doctor said she might not make it through the night. Marcus sat beside her cage until morning, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. But Bella fought, and when she opened those amber eyes and looked at him, something shifted in Marcus's world. For the first time in years, he had a reason to come home. They became inseparable. Bella rode shotgun in his pickup truck to job sites. She waited patiently while he worked, never wandering far, always watching. The other workers joked that she was better company than most humans they knew. Marcus couldn't argue with that, but life has a way of testing the bonds that matter most. The night everything changed started like any other. Marcus finished a late shift, picked up groceries, and headed home with Bella sleeping in the passenger seat. He didn't notice the car following them. He didn't see the man in the shadows outside his apartment building. He had no idea that someone had been watching him for weeks. The attack came fast. 3 men cornered him in the parking garage. They wanted his truck, his wallet, everything. Marcus fought back, not for the money, but because Bella was still inside the vehicle, and he'd be damned if he'd let anyone hurt her. That's when the first man pulled a knife. Marcus grabbed a tire iron from his truck bed. The struggle was brief, but brutal. When it ended, one of the attackers lay motionless on the concrete. The other 2 had fled, and Marcus stood there, covered in blood that wasn't entirely his own, holding a weapon that would seal his fate. The police arrived within minutes. Someone had called about the noise. They found Marcus kneeling beside Bella, who had been injured in the chaos, trying to stop her bleeding with his torn shirt. They saw a dead man and a construction worker with a tire iron. The story seemed obvious to them. "Self-defense," Marcus pleaded. "They were trying to rob me. My dog was hurt. I was protecting her." But the dead man had connections. Family in high places, friends who demanded justice, and Marcus Hayes, a nobody with no money for a decent lawyer, became the perfect scapegoat. The trial was a formality. The prosecution painted him as a violent man who'd escalated a simple robbery into murder. They ignored the fact that he'd been outnumbered. They dismissed his claims about protecting Bella. They even tried to use his devotion to the dog against him, suggesting it showed an unstable mind. His court-appointed attorney barely put up a fight. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty of murder in the first degree. As they led him away in shackles, Marcus turned back one last time to see Bella in the courtroom gallery. A neighbor had brought her, hoping Marcus could say goodbye. The dog was pressing against the barrier, whimpering, trying to reach him. Her amber eyes were locked on his, confused, desperate, loyal to the end. That was 3 years ago. Marcus had been on death row ever since, counting down the days until a system that had failed him would finally finish the job. Letters from his neighbor stopped coming after the first year. Phone calls became impossible to afford. Visits were rare and eventually non-existent. Everyone abandoned him. Everyone except Bella. Because what the courts didn't know, what the guards couldn't understand, what even Marcus himself was only beginning to realize, was that Bella hadn't just been rescued that day behind the dumpster. She'd been chosen. And dogs like Bella, dogs who've stared death in the face and lived to tell about it, don't give up on the people they love. Not ever. The Warden, Robert Chen, had overseen 43 executions in his 15-year career. He'd heard every last request imaginable. Exotic meals that cost taxpayers hundreds of dollars. Phone calls to estranged family members who hung up. Visits from religious leaders who'd never met the condemned until their final day. But a dog? That was new. Chen studied the paperwork on his desk. Marcus Hayes, 34 years old, scheduled for lethal injection at 6 a.m. sharp. No family contacts listed, no friends, no one to claim the body afterward, just a single emergency contact. Sarah Martinez, neighbor, listed as caretaker for one German Shepherd mix named Bella. The request had come through official channels. Marcus's state-appointed attorney had filed the petition, though he'd made it clear he thought it was a waste of everyone's time. The Department of Corrections had initially rejected it outright. Bringing animals into a maximum security facility violated a dozen protocols. But something about the case kept nagging at Chen. Maybe it was the complete isolation Marcus faced. Maybe it was the fact that in 3 years, not a single person had visited him. Or maybe it was the look in the man's eyes when he'd made the request, a kind of quiet desperation that Chen recognized from his own dark moments. Against his better judgment, Chen had made a few phone calls. Sarah Martinez was a retired teacher who lived in the same apartment complex where Marcus had been arrested. She'd taken care of Bella since that night, expecting someone from Marcus's family to eventually claim the dog. When no one ever did, she'd simply kept her. She's a good dog, Sarah had told Chen over the phone. Quiet, well-behaved, but she's never been the same since Marcus was taken away. She still waits by the door sometimes, like she's expecting him to come home. Chen had explained the situation, the request, the complications. Sarah had listened in silence. If Marcus wants to see her one last time, Sarah had finally said, then Bella deserves to see him too. That dog has been grieving for 3 years. Maybe they both need this. The logistics were a nightmare. Background checks on Sarah, veterinary records for Bella, security protocols that had to be rewritten on the fly. Chen had to personally guarantee the safety of everyone involved. But something told him this was the right thing to do. In a system designed around punishment, maybe there was still room for one small act of mercy. Now, as Chen watched through his office window, he saw the white van pulling through the prison gates. Inside was an elderly woman and a German Shepherd mix who had no idea she was about to see the man she'd never stopped waiting for. The guard's radio crackled to life. "Warden, they're here. What are your orders?" Chen took a deep breath. He was about to make a decision that would either be remembered as an act of compassion or the biggest security breach of his career. "Bring them to the secure yard," he said, "and tell Hayes his wish has been granted. What happened next would prove that sometimes the most powerful forces in the world aren't found in laws or institutions, or even life and death sentences. Sometimes they're found in the unwavering heart of a dog who refuses to forget. The secure yard at Colorado State Penitentiary had never hosted a reunion like this one. Guard towers loomed overhead as Sarah Martinez stepped through the reinforced gate, Bella trotting beside her on a standard leash that suddenly felt inadequate for what was about to unfold. The dog's behavior was unlike anything Sarah had witnessed in 3 years of caring for her. Bella's ears were razor-sharp, scanning every sound. Her nostrils flared as she processed scents that told stories only she could understand. This wasn't the quiet, melancholy animal who spent most days lying by the window. This was something primal awakening. Warden Chen stood 20 feet away, flanked by 4 guards whose hands rested uneasily on their equipment. He'd overseen thousands of prisoner movements, but something about this moment felt different, charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. The metal door leading from the cell block groaned open. Marcus Hayes emerged, shackled at the wrists and ankles, flanked by 2 correctional officers. He moved slowly, each step deliberate, his eyes scanning the yard until they found what they were searching for. The moment Bella saw him, everything changed. The dog's entire body went rigid. Her tail, which had been hanging low with uncertainty, shot up like a flag. A sound escaped her throat that was part whimper, part cry, part something far deeper than either. It was recognition. It was 3 years of waiting condensed into a single heart-wrenching note. Marcus stopped walking. The guards behind him had to catch themselves to avoid collision. For a man who had spent 1,000 days preparing to die, he suddenly looked like he'd been granted eternal life. "Bella," he whispered, and the word carried across the yard like a prayer. The dog strained against Sarah's grip, her powerful legs driving forward, every muscle focused on closing the 30 feet that separated her from the man she'd never stopped believing would come home. Sarah, unprepared for the sudden surge of strength, lost her hold on the leash. Bella broke free. What happened next unfolded in slow motion and lightning speed simultaneously. Guards reached for their weapons. The warden shouted orders that nobody could hear over the sound of their own heartbeats. Sarah called Bella's name, but the dog was beyond hearing anything except the voice that had whispered promises to her in a veterinary clinic 3 years ago. Bella covered the distance in 4 powerful bounds. But instead of jumping on Marcus, instead of knocking him over in the exuberant reunion everyone expected, she did something that froze every person in that yard. She sat down directly in front of him. Perfect posture. Tail wagging so hard, her entire body shook with the force of it. Eyes locked on his face with an intensity that seemed to burn through the air between them. Waiting, like she'd been trained to do. Like she remembered everything he'd ever taught her about patience and control and being good. Marcus looked down at her, and the tears he'd been holding back for 3 years finally came. Not the quiet, dignified tears of a man accepting his fate. These were sobs that came from somewhere deeper than grief. They were the cries of someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be loved unconditionally and was suddenly drowning in the memory. "Good girl," he managed to say. "You remembered. You're such a good girl." The guards exchanged glances. This wasn't what they'd expected. They'd prepared for chaos, for security breaches, for a dog that might become unpredictable in such a charged environment. They hadn't prepared for this, for dignity, for a love so pure, it made everything else in that concrete wasteland feel small and meaningless. Warden Chen made a decision that would haunt and define him for the rest of his career. He nodded to the guards flanking Marcus. "Remove the leg shackles," he said quietly. The guards hesitated. Protocol demanded that condemned prisoners remain fully restrained at all times outside their cells. But something in Chen's voice, something in the scene unfolding before them, made them comply. The moment the ankle restraints fell away, Marcus knelt down, Bella immediately pressed against him, her head finding the spot on his shoulder where it had rested 1,000 times before. Her tail never stopped moving. Her whole body vibrated with joy so pure it was almost painful to witness. Marcus buried his face in her fur, breathing in the scent of home, of loyalty, of everything good he'd ever known in his life. "I missed you so much," he whispered. "Every single day. I dreamed about you every single night." Bella whined softly, the sound muffled against his shoulder. It was as if she was telling him she knew. She'd dreamed about him too. She'd never stopped waiting. She'd never stopped believing he'd come back. The reunion might have continued forever. A perfect moment suspended in time, if not for what Bella did next. She pulled back from Marcus's embrace, looked him directly in the eyes, and then did something that made every person in that yard question everything they thought they knew about animal intelligence. She looked at his hands, still cuffed, still shackled. Then she looked up at the warden, then back at Marcus, then back at the warden, and she barked. Once. Sharp. Demanding. It wasn't a bark of aggression or fear. It was a bark of command. The kind of bark a search and rescue dog gives when they've found what they're looking for. The kind of bark that says, "Pay attention, humans, because something important is happening here." The warden felt his breath catch. In 15 years of corrections work, he'd seen everything. But he'd never seen an animal assess a situation with such clarity, such purpose. Bella wasn't just happy to see Marcus. She was trying to communicate something. She barked again, this time looking directly at Chen, her amber eyes boring into his with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. It was like being evaluated, judged, found wanting. Then Bella did something that would change the course of everything that followed. She stood up, walked 3 steps away from Marcus, and began to dig. Her powerful claws scraped against the packed earth of the prison yard, sending dirt flying. The guards moved forward, ready to intervene, but Chen held up a hand. Something told him to wait, to watch, to see what this extraordinary animal was trying to tell them. Bella dug with focused intensity, her movements precise, purposeful, not the random digging of a bored dog, but the methodical excavation of an animal who knew exactly what she was looking for. And then she found it. Her claws struck something solid, something that didn't belong in prison yard soil. She looked up at Marcus, then at the warden, and barked once more. The sound echoed off the concrete walls like a gunshot, like an accusation, like a revelation that was about to turn 3 years of accepted truth into dust. What Bella had uncovered in that moment would not only save Marcus Hayes from his appointment with death, it would expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Colorado's justice system. But first, it would test every person in that yard to decide whether they were willing to listen to what a dog was trying to tell them about innocence, truth, and the lengths some people will go to bury both. The warden stared at the small depression Bella had carved into the prison yard dirt. His mind raced through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. In his 15 years overseeing executions, he'd never encountered anything like this. Dogs didn't just dig random holes, especially not with the laser focus Bella was displaying. "What is it, girl?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind cutting through the yard. Bella looked up at him, then back at the hole, then directly at Warden Chen. Her message was crystal clear. "Look, pay attention. This matters." Chen approached slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. The guards flanked him, hands still resting on their equipment, unsure whether this was a security threat or something else entirely. Sarah Martinez had moved closer too, her face pale with confusion and growing dread. "Sir," one of the guards started, "maybe we should end this. Get the dog out of here and proceed with the schedule." But Chen held up his hand. Something deep in his gut was screaming that this moment mattered, that whatever Bella had found wasn't random, wasn't meaningless. He knelt beside the hole. At first he saw nothing but dirt and small stones, but as his eyes adjusted, something caught the light, something metallic, something that definitely didn't belong buried in a maximum security prison yard. "Get me a shovel," Chen commanded. "Sir?" The guard looked confused. "Now! Get me a shovel! And call the crime scene unit." The guard's radio crackled to life as he made the call. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived with excavation tools. What they uncovered in the next hour would rewrite not just Marcus Hayes' story, but the entire narrative surrounding his conviction. The first item was a cell phone. Waterlogged, damaged, but potentially recoverable. The kind of burner phone that couldn't be traced through normal channels. The kind criminals used when they didn't want their communications discovered. The second item made Chen's blood run cold. A knife. Not just any knife. A hunting blade with a distinctive serrated edge and a bone handle carved with initials. MR. The same knife that had been described in the original police report from Marcus's case. The murder weapon that had supposedly been lost in evidence processing. But this knife was clean. Too clean. Like someone had scrubbed it thoroughly before burying it. Like someone had been very, very careful to remove any trace evidence that might point to the real killer. Marcus stared at the items arranged on the plastic tarp beside Bella's excavation site. His face had gone white. "That's not mine," he said, his voice hollow. "I've never seen that knife before in my life." Sarah Martinez stepped forward, her elderly frame shaking with anger. "That phone," she said, pointing at the waterlogged device. "I've seen one just like it." All eyes turned to her. Chen felt his pulse hammering in his ears. "The night Marcus was arrested," Sarah continued, "I was looking out my window when I heard the commotion in the parking garage. I saw 3 men attack Marcus, just like he said. But there was a 4th man, standing back, watching. He had a phone just like that one. He was recording everything." The implications hit Chen like a physical blow. A 4th man. A witness who'd never been identified. Someone who'd recorded the attack and then disappeared. Someone who'd buried the real murder weapon in a place where it would never be found. Unless a dog who remembered everything dug it up 3 years later. "There's more," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "After the police left that night, I saw that same man come back. He spent 20 minutes in the parking garage cleaning something up. I thought he was just a good Samaritan. I had no idea he was covering up evidence." Marcus was staring at Bella with an expression that transcended gratitude. The dog had done more than provide him comfort in his final hours. She'd somehow led them to proof of what he'd been screaming for 3 years. That he was innocent. That he'd been framed. That the real killer was still out there. "We need to stop the execution," Chen said, pulling out his phone. "Right, now. We need to get the district attorney down here immediately." But even as he dialed, Chen knew they were racing against time. The execution was scheduled for 6 a.m. It was already past 4. The legal system moved slowly, even in the face of new evidence. Getting a stay of execution would require judges, lawyers, phone calls that could take hours. Hours they didn't have. Bella seemed to understand the urgency, too. She wasn't done digging. While the humans stood debating procedure and protocol, she'd moved to another spot in the yard. Her nose was working overtime, following scents that were 3 years old but still detectable to her extraordinary senses. She began digging again. This time, she uncovered something that made everyone's hearts stop. A wallet. Marcus's wallet. The one that had supposedly been stolen in the robbery attempt. The one that had never been recovered. The one that contained his identification, his credit cards, and a photograph of Bella as a puppy. But the wallet hadn't been found on any of the attackers. It had been buried here, in the prison yard, where Marcus would eventually end up, where he would die taking the truth with him, unless someone had planned for this moment all along. Chen's phone was already ringing as he connected the dots. The burial site wasn't random. Someone with access to the prison had planted this evidence here. Someone who knew Marcus would be housed in this facility. Someone who wanted to make absolutely certain that even if doubts arose about his conviction, the proof of his innocence would remain buried. The voice on the other end of the phone belonged to District Attorney Patricia Reeves. Chen had worked with her on dozens of cases over the years. She was tough, fair, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting convictions. "Patricia, we have a problem," Chen said, watching as crime scene photographers documented every inch of Bella's excavation. "I'm looking at evidence that suggests Marcus Hayes is innocent, evidence that was deliberately concealed." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like eternity. "Bob," Reeves finally said, her voice carefully controlled, "you're telling me this 4 hours before a scheduled execution. I'm telling you this the moment I found out. We need an emergency stay. We need to reopen this case. And we need to find out who had access to bury evidence in your prison yard." Another pause. Chen could hear papers rustling in the background. The sound of a woman who'd built her career on being prepared for every scenario suddenly facing something completely unexpected. "The phone and the knife," she said. "Are they recoverable for forensic analysis?" "The tech team thinks so. The phone might yield call logs, text messages, even location data if we're lucky. The knife could have trace DNA, fingerprints that weren't completely eliminated. And the witness? The neighbor?" Chen looked at Sarah Martinez, who was kneeling beside Marcus, both of them stroking Bella's head as she continued to search the yard for more buried secrets. "Solid," he said, "and willing to testify to what she saw that night. Bob, if you're wrong about this, if this is some kind of elaborate con, both our careers are over." Chen watched Bella nose around the base of a concrete pillar, her tail wagging as she caught another scent trail. This wasn't a con. This was a dog who'd spent 3 years knowing something that no human had been smart enough to figure out. A dog who'd been brought to this place at this moment for a reason that transcended coincidence. "Patricia, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The line went quiet again. Then, "I'll make the calls. But Bob, this better be the real deal. Because if it is, we're about to uncover a conspiracy that goes deeper than either of us wants to imagine." As Chen hung up the phone, he realized that Marcus Hayes' execution had become the least of their problems. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to frame an innocent man. Someone with resources, connections, and access to evidence lockers and prison facilities. Someone who was about to discover that their perfect crime had been undone by a German Shepherd mix with a memory like steel and loyalty that couldn't be buried. The clock was ticking. The real killer was still out there, and Bella wasn't finished digging. Finished digging. The hours that followed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, watching everything you thought you knew about justice crumble into the abyss below. District Attorney Patricia Reeves arrived at Colorado State Penitentiary with a team of forensic specialists, her face carved from stone, her mind racing through legal precedents that had never prepared her for this moment. The crime scene unit worked with surgical precision, cataloging every item Bella had unearthed. The cell phone went immediately to the digital forensics lab. The knife disappeared into evidence bags bound for DNA analysis. But it was the wallet that provided the first breakthrough, because tucked behind Marcus's driver's license was something nobody expected to find: a business card. Detective Ray Morrison, Private Investigation Services. The same Detective Morrison who had testified against Marcus at trial. The same man who had claimed the evidence against Marcus was ironclad. The same investigator whose testimony had sealed Marcus's fate. Warden Chen felt his world tilt sideways. Morrison hadn't just investigated the case. He'd been connected to the victim before the murder ever happened. Connected in ways that had never been disclosed to the defense. The pieces were falling into place like dominoes in an earthquake. Sarah Martinez sat in the prison conference room, her hands shaking as she gave her formal statement to investigators. The fourth man she'd seen that night, the one with the phone, the one who'd returned to clean the scene. She'd kept his description locked in her memory for 3 years, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Tall, thin-build, silver hair. A man who moved with authority, like someone used to being in charge. Someone who knew exactly what he was doing when he orchestrated Marcus's downfall. The description matched Detective Morrison perfectly, but the real revelation came when the digital forensics team worked their magic on the waterlogged phone. Despite 3 years buried in Colorado soil, the device yielded its secrets: call logs, text messages, GPS coordinates that painted a picture of conspiracy so vast it made everyone involved question how deep corruption could run. The phone belonged to Morrison. The call logs showed communications with 3 unknown numbers in the weeks leading up to Marcus's arrest. The text messages were encrypted, but the timestamps told a story that made Chen's blood run cold. Morrison had been in contact with someone 30 minutes before the attack on Marcus. The final message, sent just after the murder, contained only 2 words: "It's done." The GPS data was the smoking gun. The phone had been at Marcus's apartment building on the night of the attack. It had traveled to the police station where Morrison had filed his initial report. And then, 6 hours later, it had pinged from the construction site where the prison would later be built. Morrison had buried the evidence before the foundation was even poured. He'd planned Marcus's execution down to the square foot of earth where the truth would be entombed forever. Marcus sat in his cell, no longer on death row, but still behind bars while the investigation unfolded. For the first time in 3 years, hope felt like something more than a cruel joke. But with that hope came a rage that threatened to consume him from the inside out. They'd stolen 3 years of his life, 3 years of watching the world continue without him, 3 years of believing he might die for someone else's crime, 3 years of missing Bella, of wondering if she remembered him, of praying she was safe and loved. The irony wasn't lost on him. The system that had condemned him was now working overtime to prove his innocence. The same prosecutors who had painted him as a cold-blooded killer were now racing to uncover the real conspiracy that had destroyed his life. But it was Bella who had made it all possible. Bella, who had somehow retained memories and instincts that led her directly to evidence that trained investigators had missed. Bella, whose loyalty had transcended time and distance and the finality of what everyone thought was inevitable. 6 months later, Marcus Hayes walked through the same prison gates that had once seemed like the entrance to his tomb. This time, they opened to freedom. Detective Morrison was behind bars, along with 2 accomplices who had orchestrated the frame-up for reasons that would take months more to fully unravel. The real killer, it turned out, had been settling a debt that had nothing to do with Marcus and everything to do with corruption that reached deeper than anyone imagined. But none of the legal victories, none of the vindication, none of the settlement money that would help him rebuild his life mattered as much as the moment he saw Bella waiting for him in the parking lot. She hadn't aged well in the months since their reunion in the prison yard. The stress of separation, the confusion of being shuffled between temporary homes while the case unfolded, had taken its toll. But when she saw Marcus walking toward her as a free man, something in her eyes sparked back to life. This time, there were no guards, no protocols, no shackles. Just a man and his dog, and the kind of love that had literally moved mountains of buried evidence to set the truth free. Marcus knelt down, and Bella rushed into his arms with the same perfect discipline she'd shown in that concrete yard. But now her tail wagged with something different. Not just joy, but satisfaction. Like she'd known all along that if she just waited long enough, if she just remembered hard enough, if she just dug in the right place at the right time, everything would work out exactly as it should. Sarah Martinez stood nearby, tears streaming down her face, holding the leash she'd never need to use again. Warden Chen was there too, no longer a keeper of the condemned, but a witness to redemption. Even some of the guards had come to see Marcus walk free, men who'd learned that sometimes the most important truths come from the most unexpected sources. Marcus buried his face in Bella's fur one more time, breathing in the scent of loyalty, of hope, of second chances that most people never get. When he finally stood up, he looked back at the prison one last time, not with bitterness, but with something approaching gratitude. Because in that place of concrete and steel and human failure, He'd learned something that most people spend their entire lives trying to understand. That love doesn't have an expiration date. That loyalty doesn't recognize the walls we build around it. And that sometimes, when everything else fails, when justice seems impossible, and hope feels foolish, the simple faith of a dog who refuses to forget can move the entire world. The drive home was quiet. Bella sat in her old spot in the passenger seat, head out the window, ears flapping in the wind. Marcus reached over and scratched behind her ears, the same gesture he'd made 1,000 times before his world fell apart. "We made it, girl," he whispered. "We actually made it." Bella looked at him with those amber eyes that had never stopped believing, never stopped hoping, never stopped digging until the truth came to light. Her tail thumped against the seat once, as if to say what Marcus already knew. She'd never doubted it for a second. This story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't justice or law or even human determination. Sometimes it's the unwavering love of a creature who sees us not as the world does, but as we truly are. Bella didn't save Marcus because she understood legal systems or forensic evidence. She saved him because love doesn't know how to give up. And in a world that often feels cold and unforgiving, maybe that's the kind of loyalty we all need to remember is possible. The kind that digs until it finds the truth. The kind that waits as long as it takes. The kind that never ever stops believing that the people we love are worth fighting for. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that loyalty like this still exists. Hit that subscribe button for more incredible true stories of courage, hope, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and the animals who choose to love us. And let us know in the comments what you think about Bella's incredible intuition. Your next amazing story is just one click away.